Welcome to the Hazardous Materials General Awareness and Safety Training, brought to you by the Commercial Vehicle Safety and Compliance Institute. This is one of 3 training units you will need to complete in order to meet the requirements of 49 CFR Part 172.704, Training for Hazmat Employees. Let's begin with an introduction and the question, what is a hazardous material? Hazardous materials pose an unreasonable risk to health and safety and property during the transportation process. They possess one or more dangerous properties or hazard characteristics such as explosive, flammable, reactive, burns upon contact, poisonous when ingested, or poisonous vapors. Hazardous materials can injure or even kill if not handled properly. For your safety and the safety of others, the Hazardous Materials Regulations, or HMRs, must be followed when transporting hazardous materials. These regulations can be found in 49 CFR, Parts 100 through 185. You, the driver, are ultimately responsible for the safe transport and delivery of the hazardous materials that you are transporting. Before transporting hazardous materials, you must obtain the appropriate CDL licensing and endorsements as may be required. Hazmat endorsement is not always required to carry hazmat. Generally, a hazmat endorsement is needed to transport quantities of hazardous materials that require placarding. A tanker endorsement will be required to operate a tank vehicle which is used to transport liquid or gases in bulk. This does not include portable tanks with a capacity of less than 1,000 gallons. The hazard classifications are broken down into 9 classes. Class 1 is explosives. Class 2, gases. Class 3, flammable liquids. Class 4, flammable solids. Class 5, oxidizers and organic peroxides. Class 6, poison and toxic materials. Class 7, radioactive materials. Class 8, corrosives. And Class 9 is the miscellaneous hazardous materials class. Some hazard classes are further broken down into divisions. Divisions provide more detail about the material's hazards. For example, Class 2 gases has 3 divisions. Division 2.1 is flammable gases. Division 2.2 is non-flammable compressed gas. Division 2.3 is poison gas. Some of the classes are broken down further into packaging groups, which determines what packaging is used based upon the degree of danger that the product presents. Packing Group 1 is the greatest danger, Packing Group 2 is a medium danger, and Packing Group 3 represents a minor danger. The hazmat table is where all information about hazardous materials can be found. A list of all proper shipping names can be found in the hazmat table, and it also provides information and guidelines on how hazardous materials must be shipped, as well as a list of hazard classes or divisions, identification numbers, packing group requirements, label codes, special provisions, packaging information, and quantity limitations for air and rail transport. The hazmat table has 2 appendices. Appendix A lists materials that pose an environmental hazard when shipped in certain quantities. These are referred to as hazardous substances. Appendix B lists materials that can harm the marine environment, referred to as marine pollutants. Properly prepared shipping papers are an integral part of the hazardous materials transportation process. Proper documentation is critical for safe transport of hazardous materials. properly prepared shipping papers should include the basic description of the hazardous material that's being transported. The items that make up the basic description must appear in the following order: the UN or NA identification number, followed by the proper shipping name, the hazard class or division, any subsidiary class or division in parentheses, and the packing group. For example, sodium hydroxide solution should be listed as UN 1824, sodium hydroxide solution, 8, which represents the hazard class, and the Roman numeral 2, which represents the packing group. Drivers must never accept any shipment of hazardous materials without a properly prepared hazardous materials shipping paper or bill of lading accompanying the shipment. The total quantity of the hazardous materials is also required on the shipping papers, as well as the number and type of packages. Hazardous materials must stand out on the shipping papers. This may be done by listing the hazmat first, listing it in a contrasting color, or inserting an X or an RQ in the column designated HM. Shipping papers must also contain a shipper certification, which states that the shipment is properly classed, packed, marked, labeled, and placarded, and is in proper condition for safe transport. Emergency response phone number must also be listed on the shipping papers. If the service provider for the emergency response is a third-party contract provider, you must also list the service contract number. Emergency response information must be provided for any hazardous material shipment that requires shipping papers. The information provided in the emergency response information should include a description of the hazardous material, any health hazards that it presents, fire or explosion risks, immediate precautions to take in the event of an accident or incident, how to handle a fire, how to handle a spill or leak, and any first aid measures. Emergency response information may be listed on the shipping papers, may be provided by Emergency Response Guidebook, or by attaching a copy of the SDS or Safety Data Sheet, formerly known as an MSDS, to the shipping paper packet. Shipping papers must always be readily accessible at all times in case of an emergency or roadside inspection. They must be visible and within reach of the driver while restrained by a seatbelt while the vehicle is in motion. When you leave the cab of your truck, always place your shipping papers in the driver's side door pouch or in the driver's seat for ready access. How hazmat is packaged and marked is a significant aspect of the transportation process for safely transporting hazardous materials. With regard to non-bulk hazmat, they are generally shipped in what is called performance-oriented packaging, or POP, or UN packaging. The standards are stringent, so they will be less likely to leak in transport. Packages will have a manufacturer's UN mark to show that it conforms to the United Nations standards. On most non-bulk packages, the shipper must display the proper shipping name, the ID number, orientation arrows for liquids to ensure the package stays upright during transport, and the name and address of the shipper or receiver. All package markings must be clearly visible and printed in English. They must be in a contrasting color and printed on the package or attached to a surface in the form of a label, a sign, or a tag. They must be placed away from all other markings that could substantially reduce their effectiveness, such as any advertising. For bulk packages, the following applies. Material ID numbers must be displayed in certain ways on the unit. If the bulk container holds less than 1,000 gallons, the ID number must be marked on two opposite sides of the unit. If the bulk container holds greater than 1,000 gallons, the ID number must be marked on both sides and on both ends. For tube trailers, the marking must appear on each end and each side of the tube trailer. The ID markings can be printed in black on an orange panel, across the center of a primary hazard placard, or on a white square on point configuration. Generally, when the bulk package is transported, the ID number for the hazmat it contains must be marked on all four sides of the package or, in some cases, on the transport vehicle. Hazard warning labels are required on most non-bulk packages. It's the shipper's responsibility to select and attach the proper labels, and the driver's responsibility to make sure that they are correct. Some packages have more than one label because they have multiple hazards. Primary labels look the same as subsidiary labels. Labels are placed on the surface of the package near the shipping name. They may be placed on a tag that is securely attached to the package, and labels must be clearly visible so that they are not confused with any other package markings. Placards are very similar to labels and look somewhat like a larger version of a hazardous materials label. Placards must be displayed on each end and each side of bulk packaging units or transport vehicles. They must be displayed horizontally with words and ID numbers reading from left to right, and they must be clearly visible from the direction it faces and must be securely attached to the vehicle or the container. It's the driver's responsibility to display placards that they're given and to make sure that they are the correct placards for the hazmat that they are transporting. Certain materials with more than one hazard must be placarded to show multiple hazards. Placards help emergency response teams identify what types of hazmat are present so that they'll know the appropriate actions to take in the event of an accident or an incident. Placards must be left in place until the container is cleaned and purged of any hazmat. The required placards for any hazmat shipment can be found in one of two placard tables located in the hazmat regulations. Table 1 lists categories of materials that require placards regardless of what quantity is being transported. For example, any quantity of poisonous gas must be placarded at all times. Table 2 lists categories of materials that must be placarded if the gross weight of all Table 2 materials being transported in non-bulk packages equals or exceeds 1,001 pounds. If two or more materials from Table 2 are shipped together, a dangerous placard may be used instead of several individual placards. However, if one of these categories of materials weighs 2,205 pounds or more and is loaded at one location, the placard specified in Table 2 for that category must be used, and separate placards must be used for any other categories which may be present. Now let's discuss loading and segregation. When loading, always set the parking brake and shock the wheels before loading or unloading to prevent your vehicle from moving. Packages must be secured to prevent shifting, including relative motion between packages during transport. The regulations require that a qualified person be present when a cargo tank is being loaded or unloaded. This person must be knowledgeable about the material being loaded or unloaded, know what to do in an emergency situation, be authorized and have means to move the cargo tank, be alert within 25 feet of the tank, and have an unobstructed view of the cargo tank at the delivery hose to the maximum extent practicable. It is critical that you as a driver know what materials can be shipped together. The hazmat segregation table helps to understand that. It tells what materials can be loaded, shipped, and stored together. An X indicates materials that cannot be loaded or stored together. An O indicates that they cannot be loaded together unless they're separated to prevent materials from mixing in the event of an accident or incident. If it's blank, then there are no restrictions. For example, if we look at the table to the right, we can see that most explosives cannot be loaded or stored with flammable gases. Now let's discuss some safety and security tips. Inspect your tires in a pre-trip inspection and every time you park the vehicle. This is a mandatory requirement. Always perform a post-trip inspection. Make sure that all placards are in place and in good condition. If they are damaged or missing, they need to be replaced. While fueling, your engine must be shut off and you or someone else must be in control of the fueling process. Do not park on or within 5 feet of a roadway unless you must stop for a brief period and no other parking is reasonably available. If you're transporting Division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosives, you must not park on or within 5 feet of a roadway. You should always avoid tunnels, narrow roads, narrow bridges, and heavily populated areas when transporting placarded loads of hazardous materials. Never park within 300 feet of an open flame, a bridge, a tunnel, a dwelling, or any place where people gather in large numbers. Do not drive near an open fire unless you can pass by safely without stopping. Do not smoke on or within 25 feet of your vehicle if you're transporting explosives, oxidizers, flammable materials, or an empty tank vehicle that has contained flammables. Unless there are no practicable alternatives, always follow marked hazmat routes. It's crucial that you know the specific requirements for the materials that you transport. If you're uncertain as to what these are, talk with your supervisor before heading out. There is no excuse for not knowing the hazmat requirements and your company's policies. It's extremely important that you know what to do in the event of a hazmat incident or accident. A hazmat incident is defined as any unintentional release of a hazardous material from its packaging. It's your responsibility as a driver to know your company's policies for a hazmat incident. Accident and incident reports need to be made promptly. Now let's briefly discuss security issues. Cargo is most at risk when it's being transported. Your vehicle can even be used as a weapon of mass destruction in the wrong hands. It's very important that you know how to keep your load and yourself safe at all times. All hazmat employees must receive security awareness training. The training must cover security risks associated with transporting hazardous materials, methods to enhance transportation security, and how to recognize a security threat and respond accordingly. Some hazmat employees must receive in-depth security training if the employer is required to have a hazmat security plan in place. Your company may also be subject to the National Registration Program for Hazardous Materials, which is administered by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA. If so, you must carry proof of your company's hazmat registration in your vehicle. Accepted forms of proof of registration include a copy of the current registration certificate or another document that clearly shows and identifies your hazmat registration number. Congratulations, you've now completed the required Hazmat General Awareness and Safety Training unit. You may now proceed to the General Awareness and Safety Training test that follows this unit, then proceed to the Hazmat Security Awareness Training unit that follows.